The mention of Lake Bodom easily brings one of Finland's heartbreaking, unsolved murder cases to mind. A group of teenagers had simply gone camping, but didn't make it back home. 6 decades have passed, and no one has been able to put a name to the mysterious killer. What if he's dead? What if he's not? My name is Zach, and you are watching Crime Origin. Before the murders, morning and evening. On Saturday, June 4th, 1960, Mila Ermeli Björklund and Anja Tulikki Maki, each aged 15, had gone camping with their boyfriends, Nils Gustafsson and Seppo Antero Boisman, respectively, both aged 18. The girls had met each other at a school where they both learned a vocation, while the boys were apprentices at a foundry. The couples had chosen to camp that weekend along Lake Bodom shore, particularly in Högnäs, which happened to be in the same area as the Ipos Oitat Manor. The couples arrived at Högnäs around noontime and then proceeded to set up a tent. After creating a shelter for themselves, they decided to do other things, such as swimming and fishing, while the boys further helped themselves to a few drinks. The group stayed up until midnight before going back into the tent. However, Gustafsson and Boisman were having difficulty sleeping, so they decided to do some more fishing, after which they returned to the tent to join the girls. The next morning. On Sunday, June 5th, 1960, the tent where the couples had laid the night before had collapsed and appeared to be covered in blood. There were 2 bodies under the tents. The body on the tent looked like that of Boisman. His body had been stripped bare from the waist and had been mauled horrifyingly using a knife. Outside the tent was Gustafsson, who lay unconscious, making him the only one who survived the incident, which had occurred that morning, albeit with some serious injuries. He had suffered serious injuries to his head and jaw, and also had a deep gash on his cheek through which people could see his teeth. At about 11 a.m. later that morning, Esko Johansson, a carpenter, and his son had gone swimming in the lake, and just before they plunged into the water, Esko then spotted the bloodied tent and went down to see what was going on. Having seen the horrendously bruised bodies of the teenagers, he ran back with his son into town to report what he saw to the police. It appeared that Esko Johansson was not the only one who stumbled upon the camping site, as another man named Sigurd Volasma also went to the police to report what he had also seen. On the arrival of the police, Gustafsson was immediately rushed to the hospital and was there for a couple of weeks. It was said that his head injury made it difficult for him to remember what had happened at the camping site. At the time, it was quite popular to get the account of people's stories using hypnosis, and so the same tactic was applied in Gustafsson's case, so he could tell the police what had transpired the morning the murders took place. Luckily, he was able to remember a few things. The murders. It was said the murders probably took place between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., which happened to be the time when you would barely find anyone in the forest. This leaves the question of whether or not the murders were premeditated. Also, 2 young boys had mentioned that they had spotted the collapsed tent at about 6 a.m. that morning while they were out hiking and birdwatching. They also mentioned that they had seen a man with blonde hair walking away from the tent around the same time, but did not call the police because they didn't think it was necessary. Because the only description the police had of the murderer was that he had blonde hair, which didn't seem to give anything away, the police had to fall back on Gustafsson, who added that just before the murders took place, he had caught a glimpse of a man with shiny red eyes in a black outfit. According to Gustafsson, the man had been staring down at them through a hole in the tent and had beaten and wounded them from outside the tent as well. A fisherman's son, who had been out fishing at the time, also mentioned that although he didn't hear any noise coming from the direction of the tent, he had seen a blonde man who looked like he was in his 20s and was about 5'8" walking down a path. The investigation. Initially, the investigation was quite a slow process. Seeing as it involved the murder of 3 young people, one would expect that the Finnish police would get on with it. But that wasn't the case. First off, it turned out that they destroyed whatever evidence they could have gotten from around the campsite after firing off police dogs and randomly searching the area, which contaminated the scene of the homicide. 2, the campsite was not marked off with the police tape as you would find in most murder cases, so that meant anyone could have also decided to go camping and set up a tent on the same spot. As time progressed, it began to seem like the police were heading somewhere. They recovered Gustafsson's shoes, which appeared to have been hidden, and were also about 500 meters away from the crime scene, and also discovered that belongings, which included the wallets and moped keys of the victims, were missing. The police concluded that the murder weapons were probably a knife and a rock, even though they were never found. Shortly after, the Finnish army began to carry out a comprehensive search in the lake and nearby surroundings. Eventually, the police were able to find, in the water, an empty bottle with 2 fingerprints. Later on, they found a pillowcase on the campsite. This pillowcase was tied with the band, but that didn't stop the police from finding semen and blood traces on it. Sadly, since the blood and semen didn't belong to one person, it made it difficult for the police to get conclusive results. As a result, the police intensified the search around the lake. They searched the forest repeatedly and even went onto the roads to set up checkpoints. While searching the forest, the police found 88 wanted criminals in hiding. However, it turned out that none of them was the killer of the group. The police began conducting interviews, hoping that they would seek the killer out via that means. They interviewed about 4,000 people and were able to get some names of the likely criminals and a sketch of the murderer's face from Gustafsson's hypnosis session. Suspects. The first suspect on the list was Pauli Kusta Luoma. It was said that Luoma had approached a carpenter at about 10 a.m. that morning after the murders had happened, asking for a cigarette. The carpenter who lived in the forest said that Luoma had bloodstains on some parts of his body, including his arms and chest. It was also said that Luoma had a criminal history of theft and robbery and was on the wanted list of the police, having escaped from a labor facility. However, Luoma had an alibi who was able to prove that he did not commit the murders. Plus, they said that the bloodstains on his body came from the wounds he got while he was escaping from the facility. The second suspect was Pentti Soinian. Soinian was a 15-year-old boy who had been diagnosed with psychotic tendencies. Soinian had also escaped from a facility, but in his case, it was a care home. Although Soinian was suspected of having committed the crimes, the police found out that he was nowhere near the campsite the day the murders happened. Prime suspects. These suspects, unlike the first two, seemed to have more connection to the murder cases. Valdemar Gillström, the first prime suspect, was said to have owned a kiosk at the camping center, which was west of the lake, Ottawa. Gillström was quite popular in the area, but it wasn't for good. He was a violent alcoholic who often beat up his wife and children. There were records of him throwing rocks at campers in the forest and doing all sorts of dangerous things to get them to leave. For this reason, the people in the area first suspected him after they heard about the murders in the forest. They told the police about how he's never liked campers, and seeing that as a motive, the police began a search on his property. The police, however, did not find anything, and when brought in for questioning, Gillström told the police that he was at home with his family that evening, using his wife as an alibi. His wife also testified that he didn't commit the murders, and so the police let Gillström go. The second prime suspect was Hans Assmann, aged 36. Hans Assmann was a German who lived in Espoo, which was a few miles away from the crime scene. On June 6, 1960, the day the murders happened, Assmann had shown up at Helsinki General Hospital and was said to have been acting weirdly. They said that Assmann's clothes were tainted with red and that he had dirt under his fingernails. He also pretended to pass out when the doctor was trying to find out if he was sick. Even more suspicious was the fact that Assmann fit the sketch the police had drawn using Gustafsson's description while he was under hypnosis. Jorma Palo, the doctor assigned to Assmann, had reported Assmann to the police after hearing about the Lake Bodom murders. The police arrived at the hospital and took Assmann away for questioning. However, Assmann was released shortly after because he claimed that he had an alibi, who turned out to be a lady he was supposedly having an affair with. Apparently, they had been together at the time the murders took place. When the police asked him why his clothes had red stains, he explained that he was drunkenly painting a job site that morning. 44 years later. In March 2004, Gustafsson was arrested by the police for the murder of his friends. They found on Gustafsson's shoes, which had been hidden about 500 meters away from the camping site, the blood of his friends. This seemed possible because it was 2004 and the technology at the time was more advanced compared to all those years ago. Gustafsson was arrested, already in his 60s, and was put in jail for 2 months, but was later released after the judge considered him not to be a flight risk. A year and 2 months had passed before Gustafsson returned to court to face trial. Gustafsson faced trial on August 4, 2005. The prosecution narrated to the court that Gustafsson had sought sexual gratification from Björklund, who turned him down. He then got so mad that Bossman threw him out of the tent, and the two got into a fight where he sustained blows to his jaw and the back of his head. Gustafsson then left and returned with a knife and a rock, which he used in finishing off his friends, especially Björklund, whom he said to have stabbed 15 times. The defense countered the case of the prosecution by explaining that if Gustafsson had really suffered an injury to his head and jaw, he would have been too disoriented to carry out such a crime. They also said that 4 of them had suffered the same fractures to the head, so someone had committed the crimes, but that person wasn't Gustafsson. The medical experts on the defense side said that Gustafsson also had an issue with cerebral fluid, which was pretty critical. As for Gustafsson's shoes, they explained that if he really committed the murders, he would have hidden them the way he hid their wallets and moped keys, which the police never found. Also, they questioned why Björklund got the most stabs when naturally Gustafsson would have targeted Boisman, who had beat him up and humiliated him in front of the girls. The fisherman's son also testified that he had indeed seen a blonde guy, but Gustafsson wasn't that guy. The judge's verdict. On October 7, 2005, the judge, Lama Heikki Mikola, acquitted Gustafsson of the charges against him. According to the jury, the prosecution did not have enough evidence to prove that Gustafsson was the perpetrator of the Lake Bodom murders. Gustafsson also raised a court case asking for compensation for all those months he spent in jail and was eventually compensated with 45,000 euros. Nobody knows if either of these guys committed the murders, but what's certain is that the Lake Bodom story remains a mystery. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment your take down below, and subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case.